It began on a quiet Sunday morning in early autumn. The kind of morning when the light feels soft enough to forgive, when the air tastes of dew and cold tea. I was up early, as I always am, habit or maybe hope. The house was still half asleep, the walls holding onto the hush before the footsteps and voices began. I stood by the kitchen window, watching the thin fog slide over the grass. The garden looked pale and slow, as if even the earth didn't want to wake up yet. I poured water into the kettle and listened to it hum. The small sounds of routine. That was the kind of music that kept me going. I still made breakfast for everyone. Not because they asked me to, not because they cared if I did or didn't, but because it was the only way I still felt useful. The table had been set the same way every Sunday for 30 years. It used to be Daniel's habit, my late husband. 2 cups for us, 1 for Clara when she was a child. Now the table had 6 places, though no one ever waited for me to sit down. The kettle began to whistle. I turned the stove off and poured coffee into the cups. My hands weren't as steady as they used to be. Some of it spilled onto the counter, dark drops staining the white surface like small bruises. I wiped them quickly, hoping no one saw. Evan came down first. He never said good morning. The sound of his steps on the stairs already told me what kind of day it would be. Fast, loud, heavy. He walked into the kitchen, still looking at his phone. "Coffee," he said. Not a question, not a greeting, just that word. I nodded and placed the cup in front of him. I knew how he liked it. Too strong, too bitter. He didn't look up when I slid it toward him. Clara appeared next. She wore her neat office clothes, her hair perfectly pinned. She looked tired but beautiful, like someone holding her breath for too long. She kissed him on the cheek and smiled that small, polite smile that used to be mine. "Did the kids wake up yet?" she asked me. "Yes," I said. "They're getting dressed." Evan sighed. "You didn't tell them to hurry?" "I did," I said softly. "They're brushing their teeth." He rolled his eyes, muttered something under his breath, and took the first sip. Then it happened. The moment that cracked the silence of my morning ritual. He slammed the cup down. Coffee splashed across the table, over his hand, over mine. "For God's sake, this is cold," he shouted. I froze. It wasn't cold. I had poured it seconds ago. Clara tried to calm him. "Evan, it's fine." "No," he snapped. "It's not fine. I work all week to pay for this house, and I can't even get a warm cup of coffee from her. Her, that's what I was now, not Haven, not Mom, just her." I reached for a towel. "I'll make a new one," I said. He pushed his chair back so hard it screeched against the tiles. "You don't need to. I'll buy one from the cafe like everyone else." He left. The door slammed. Clara stood there, not looking at me, just staring at the spilled coffee dripping off the edge of the table. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I wanted to say it wasn't her fault, that she didn't have to apologize for the way her husband treated me, but instead I said, "It's all right, it's just coffee." When she left for work, the house emptied like a lung exhaling. The clock ticked too loud. The smell of burnt coffee hung in the air. I sat down at the table, my hands trembling. The stain spread like a bruise across the wood Daniel had polished with his own hands. Daniel built this house. Every beam, every step, every brick had a piece of him. He had strong hands and a quiet voice. When he worked, he hummed old songs without remembering the words. He once told me this kitchen was the heart of our home. "It's where people come to talk," he said. "If the kitchen is warm, the family stays together." Now it felt like a cold museum of something that used to be alive. I touched the edge of the table and thought of him. Of the way he used to smell like sawdust and rain. I could almost hear him saying my name the way only he did, slow, patient, with love. Then the kettle whistled again. I had forgot to turn it off. I stood, turned the flame down, and leaned against the counter. The mirror opposite the stove caught my reflection. My hair looked whiter than I remembered. My eyes smaller. The mirror had been Daniel's idea too. "It'll make the room feel bigger," he'd said. But as I stared at it, I noticed something faint along the edge of the wooden frame. Scratched letters, old and thin. I moved closer, brushed off a film of dust. My fingers followed the grooves. "This house is mine," Daniel's handwriting. I remembered the night he carved it, joking that he was marking his territory like a fox. But the words felt different now, like a whisper from another time. "This house is mine." The words glimmered faintly in the morning light. I stood there for a long moment, tracing them with my fingertips. I smiled. Not because I believed I owned anything, but because the truth of that carving had survived everything else that didn't. Silence returned, heavy and familiar. Outside, a robin landed on the windowsill. It pecked once, then flew away. I wondered if it had somewhere safe to go. I didn't, not yet, but something inside me shifted that morning. It wasn't anger, not exactly. It was a quiet certainty, like a seed cracking underground. They thought I stayed silent because I was weak. They didn't know silence can be a choice, and I had just made mine. I waited for the kettle to quiet, then poured a fresh cup and held it in both hands until the warmth sank through my fingers and bones. My palms smelled like roasted beans and old wood. The taste steadied me. I should have moved on to the laundry or the sink or the crumbs along the breadboard, the endless little chores that make a day look useful from the outside. Instead, I stood in the center of the kitchen and listened to the hush that comes after unkindness. There is a hush like sleep, and there is a hush like an empty church. This one was the second. Upstairs, a closet door shut. A whisper of voices. Socks scuffed in the hallway, and then light steps ticked down the stairs. Lily appeared first, hair in a lopsided ponytail, one sock red and one sock blue. She stopped when she saw the stain on the table and the damp towels on the chair. "Grandma," she said, "did you spill again?" "I did," I said, and I held my cup up like a toast. "And look how bravely I made another." She giggled and ran a small finger through the edge of the stain. "Does it hurt?" "Not anymore," I said. Then I touched her cheek. "Are you hungry always?" she said, and hopped onto a chair. Her legs swung in the empty space above the floor, the soles knocking a patient rhythm against the wood. I gave her toast with jam and a banana sliced into moons. For a minute, the room remembered how to feel like a kitchen, not a courtroom. Aiden came down next with his backpack already on. He is the kind of boy who makes a plan for the day and then keeps it, even if the plan is only cartoons and cereal. He eyed the ruin on the table and then met my gaze. He has Daniel's eyes, gray-blue and steady. "Everything okay, Grandma?" "Everything is fine," I said. He looked like he wanted to ask more but thought better of it. He chose an apple, washed it, and dried it with the hem of his shirt. Then he sat and ate it slice by slice, turning the core slowly like a small planet. Clara returned in her heels, breath moving too quickly for a quiet morning. She put a hand on each child's shoulder and smiled the quick smile she uses to get through a doorway. She kissed Lily on the hair and Aiden on the forehead, then she saw the towels and the stain and the empty mug. "Evan went out," she said. I nodded and reached for the cloth again as if things could be cleaned by repeating the same gesture enough times. She watched me and said nothing for a long beat that felt like a year. "You should rest after they leave," she said at last. "I will," I said. She gathered them toward the door. Lily waved, apple jam on her mouth. Aiden gave me a small salute like a soldier in a play. Clara's eyes met mine for a fraction. The fraction had so many sentences in it. She broke the moment and the house swallowed them as the door clicked shut. Silence again. Birds again, the clock again. What a chorus my house keeps now. I took the kettle to the sink and filled it to the line Daniel scratched inside the metal with a nail. He said the line made the tea come out right every time. He said rules were kindness dressed as habit. I set the kettle down and opened the back door. The air outside felt honest. Cold, but honest. I stepped onto the worn stone step and breathed until my chest loosened. The garden needed trimming. The border of lavender had turned gray like old hair. The lake beyond the hedge lay flat and unreadable. I thought of the first winter Daniel and I spent here, when the radiators hissed and the windows whistled and we huddled under a blanket at the kitchen table because we could not afford to fix anything yet. He warmed my hands between his, then cupped them around a mug like this one, and said we would make the house know us and we would know it. He said walls are like children. They learn the people who touch them. I closed the door and returned to the mirror. The words along the frame looked lighter now, not because the room had shifted, but because I had. This house is mine, not mine like a trophy, mine like a promise, mine like a name I keep even when no one says it. I wiped the table again. Then I fetched my small notebook from the drawer where the tea towels live. The cover is cracked and the elastic tired. I sat by the light and wrote the date and then 2 lines. Coffee, spill, no apology, voice raised, her instead of my name. The act of writing cleared the air inside my chest. It gave shape to the fog. I do not write to prove I am right. I write so that I can see what is true when the noise tries to drown it. The front door opened and closed. I heard the familiar grunt that announces Evan when he returns to take the car. He came to the kitchen and reached for his keys, then stopped when he saw me at the table. The towels on the chair were already folded, the stain lighter now, the cloth damp in the sink. He said nothing. I said nothing. That was the rule we both understood. He left again. The rule held. By 10, the house had settled into its weekday costume. The counters showed their shine. The floor had forgotten footprints. The refrigerator hummed like a cat asleep on its own story. I made a second breakfast for myself because the first one had not been real. Toast with butter and heaven's impatience, Daniel used to call it. I ate standing up, an old habit mothers never break. When I finished, I washed the plate and set it to dry. Then I went to the hall cupboard and drew out a box that smelled faintly of cedar and old paper. I did not open it. Not yet. I took it to my room and set it at the foot of the bed and smoothed the quilt Daniel liked the most, the one with a crooked seam that always made him smile. The sun found my window for a moment and painted the edge of the box with a thin gold stripe. I sat and waited for the day to explain itself, but it did not. I heard Maggie's name inside my head then, the way she says it when she is scolding me for being too soft. She runs the bakery in the village and believes warmth can be coerced out of flour and sugar if you love it long enough. I could almost smell her cinnamon rolls. I told myself I would go there later. I told myself that stepping into a place that proves sweetness still rises was a thing a person should do at least once a week. I reached for the phone, then put it down. I did not want to explain this morning to anyone. Words sometimes turn pain into story too soon, and story into performance. I wanted only the quiet work of cleaning and the clean work of quiet. I dusted the bookshelf and touched the spines of all the books I used to teach. I stopped at one that still carried a card from a student who wrote that my class felt like a room with windows when the rest of school felt like a hallway with no doors. I wondered where he is now and if he keeps a notebook and if he has learned how to speak gently to himself. I wish that for everyone, even for Evan, especially for Clara. Near noon, I put on my coat and stepped outside. The sky had turned the color of pearl. In the lane, the hedges nodded in a light wind. I walked slowly, pressing my hands into my pockets. The stones in the path knew my feet. They remembered the hurry of young motherhood and the lazy pace of late love and now the careful tread of a woman who is learning the choreography of waiting. A neighbor waved from his garden. He asked about the weather and the lake and the apples that came early this year. We exchanged the small coins of village conversation, the ones that make a person feel part of a map even when the lines are thin. He did not ask about Clara. He did not ask about Evan. He asked about the birds and the frost because he is kind. I reached the bakery and the bell laughed when I opened the door. Warmth hit my face like a coat. Maggie looked up from a tray of scones and grinned in the way that returns a person to themselves. "You are avoiding me," she said. "Never," I said. She wiped her hands and came around the counter and hugged me. She is a small woman who makes you feel held by a giant. She looked at my hands and then at my eyes and then she reached for a mug without asking and poured tea. "Tell me how you are in 3 sentences," she said. "I am fine," I said. "I am tired," I said. "And I am practicing belief." "Belief in what?" she asked. "In the right to the space my body takes," I said, "and in the right of a house to remember who kept it warm." She nodded as if we had just measured the flour for a cake together. She gave me a scone that smelled like butter and clouds. We watched a couple argue softly over a table near the window, and then watched them stop arguing and laugh. Sometimes love is a turn like that. Sometimes it is a long road with poor lighting and your hand on the wall. I told Maggie about the coffee without telling her about the coffee. I described a morning that begins generous and ends bruised. She listened without interruption the way an old friend learns to listen after her own heart has been broken and mended several times. "You could come stay with me for a few days," she said. "Thank you," I said. "Not yet." "Not yet," she repeated. She does not press. We moved to safer weather. Butter, jam, the merits of clotted cream. The way children always manage to grow out of their shoes in October. When I left the bakery, I felt heavier and lighter in the exact same places. The walk home took longer because I stopped by the lake and watched a pair of swans move like thoughts that mean no harm. I asked the lake a question I did not say out loud. The lake refused to answer, and I respected that. Back in the kitchen, I set the bread on the cutting board and sharpened the knife. The sound is clean and promising, like a sentence that finally finds its verb. I sliced thin pieces for the soup I would make that evening. Carrots, onions, a chicken bone saved from another meal. The kind of soup that remembers how to feed a person who used to feed many people. I checked the clock. I still had time before the house filled again. I carried the cedar box to the kitchen table and sat down with it. My hands rested on the lid. I did not open it. Not yet. Instead, I wrote another line in the notebook. Afternoon. Sky gentle. Mirror truthful. Then I closed the notebook and waited for the sound of the door. The sound that always returns at the end of every school day and work day and market day. The sound that starts the next chapter whether or not you are ready. When Clara came in with the children, the kitchen remembered laughter. Lily told me about a drawing of a whale that looked like a shoe. Aiden showed me a math problem with a long train of numbers that made sense only to the people who love numbers for their own sake. I kissed their heads and the world felt less tilted. Clara asked if there was tea. I poured it for her, and for a moment we stood on the same side of the counter. Then the door opened again and Evan's voice came in ahead of him, louder than the air needed. The room changed shape around the sound the way a pawn changes shape around a thrown stone. He nodded at me and went to the refrigerator. He said he had a late meeting and an early start, and why was the calendar full of things no one had told him about? The questions were not questions. They were the rattling of a cage he kept in his chest. I did not answer. He did not expect me to. I ladled soup into bowls and set them on the table. We ate. The children told their stories, skipped through their days, asked for more bread. Clara stared at a point somewhere beyond the wall and came back when someone said her name. Evan tapped his phone and then set it face down and then tapped it again. After dinner, I washed the dishes and listened to the water speak a language of rivers. Clara dried them and said almost nothing. When the last plate was stacked and the last fork in its drawer, she looked at me as if she had just solved a small riddle. "You could take tomorrow morning for yourself," she said. "Sleep in. Do something you like." "I will," I said, and I almost believed it. When the house finally quieted, I carried the cedar box back to my room. I closed the door and laid the box on the bed. The moon had climbed the window. The quilt looked like a hillside in winter. I rested my palm on the lid again and counted to 10. I listened to the old click in my hip and the soft wind along the glass and the heartbeat I have come to trust. Then I lifted the lid a fraction and closed it again. "Not yet," I said to the room. "Not yet. Some choices need a night to grow their legs. Some truths prefer the dark before they agree to be seen." I turned off the lamp and slid into the cool sheets and let the house breathe around me. For a long time, I stared at the ceiling and traced the crack above the wardrobe that looks like a river on a map. In the edge of sleep, I heard Daniel's laugh the way a child hears the sea in a shell. I did not move. I did not answer. I kept my quiet, and it kept me. That night the rain came. It started as a whisper against the roof and grew into a long conversation between water and stone. I lay awake and listened. Every drop felt like a small memory finding its way back to me. When the house sleeps, it tells the truth. You can hear the small shifts of wood, the size of metal cooling, the pulse of the walls that have seen too much silence. I got up before dawn. The sky was still blue-black, the kind of color that belongs to secrets. I wrapped a shawl around my shoulders and went to the kitchen. The smell of damp earth came through the window. I boiled water, made tea, and sat by the table. The cedar box waited near my elbow. I ran my fingers along its edge, tracing the tiny scratches Daniel once called the house's wrinkles. I opened it. Inside lay a stack of envelopes tied with twine, a folder of papers, and a photograph. Daniel stood beside the half-built house, hammer in one hand, hair caught by the wind. Behind him, the frame of the roof reached into the sky like a promise. On the back of the photo, he had written 2 words for us. The first letter in the stack was from him, dated the winter before he died. The paper had softened with time. His handwriting, still careful, still patient. He wrote about the garden and the lake and the way the house seemed to breathe when we were kind to it. He ended with a sentence I had forgotten until that moment. "If they ever make you feel like a guest here, remember the soil knows your name." I folded the letter and pressed it to my chest. For a long time I could hear his voice inside the rain. It was not nostalgia, it was direction. I realized then that my silence had a purpose I had never put into words. I was not waiting for someone to save me, I was waiting to remember how to save myself. When the first light touched the window, I began to read through the folder. Deeds, contracts, receipts with Daniel's signature. My name appeared again and again. Haven E. Craig, owner. The papers smelled faintly of smoke and ink. I closed them and leaned back. The house groaned softly as if it knew I had opened its heart. I spent the morning moving slowly through each room. The hallway where Clara had taken her first steps. The stair rail Daniel carved. The small mark near the door where Aiden measured his height last spring. Every wall carried fingerprints of better days. I whispered their names as I passed, the way one prays without expecting an answer. At noon, the rain stopped. The clouds hung low, gray and swollen. I made soup again, not because anyone asked, but because the rhythm of chopping and stirring makes time move gently. The smell filled the house, and for a while I could pretend it was comfort and not cover. I ate one bowl and kept the rest warm for the evening. The phone rang once. I let it. The sound felt like an invitation to return to the same small circle of apologies that never reach forgiveness. When it stopped, the silence came back richer, more loyal. I took the notebook from the counter and wrote. Morning rain, house breathing, remembered my name. Then I added one more line. This silence is not fear. In the afternoon, the children came home, voices bright, shoes muddy. I washed their hands, listened to their stories, nodded in the right places. Evan returned later than usual. He smelled of wet wool and impatience. He asked where dinner was, though it waited on the stove. I told him it was ready. He lifted the lid, frowned, said nothing, sat down to eat. Clara arrived last, her hair dark with rain. She kissed my cheek and whispered that the city was impossible today. I smiled and told her to sit. For a few minutes we were only people at a table. The soup cooled, the rain began again, and no one raised their voice. After the dishes were done, I returned to my room and wrote another note. Evening calm. I still belong here. I closed the notebook and placed it beside the box. Outside, thunder rolled over the hills. The lights flickered once. The sound reminded me of a door unlocking somewhere deep in the house. That was the night I decided to see Arthur Finn again. Daniel had trusted him with everything legal, everything final. I had avoided him for years because talking about documents meant admitting that Daniel was gone. But now the papers called me back to that unfinished business. I lay down and let the thoughts settle. In the half-sleep that follows decision, I dreamt of walking through the garden. Daniel waited near the gate, smiling, pointing toward the horizon. The air smelled like lavender and rain. He said nothing. He didn't need to. When morning came, I woke with the image still clear. I dressed in my gray coat, tied my hair back, and slipped the folder into my bag. The house watched me leave, its windows reflecting the slow certainty of my steps. I walked to the bus stop at the end of the lane. The world looked washed clean. People carried umbrellas and hurried toward their own stories. I sat near the window, the folder on my lap. The city rose around me, gray towers cutting through the mist. I counted the stops like prayer beads until the sign for the legal district appeared. Arthur's office sat above a small bookstore. The bell on the door jingled with the same sound it had 15 years ago. He looked older but steady, like the frame of a door that has learned to bear weight. Haven Craig, he said, standing. I never expected to see you again. I smiled. Life is full of things we stop expecting, I said. He gestured toward a chair. What brings you back? I opened the bag and placed the folder on his desk. I need to confirm some details, I said. He adjusted his glasses, scanned the papers, and nodded slowly. Your name is still here on every line. You never transferred ownership. I know, I said. He looked up. Then what is it you want to confirm? I took a breath that felt heavier than air. I want to make sure no one can take this house from me. Or from what Daniel meant it to be. He closed the folder gently. They can't, Haven, not legally. It's yours, always has been. The words landed softly, like a truth I had already guessed. He leaned back and watched me the way a teacher watches a student discover her own answer. What will you do now? He asked. I don't know yet, I said, but I think the house should breathe again. He nodded as if he understood the language of my riddle. Some things are meant to return to the earth, he said. Maybe, I said. But not before they teach the living how to stay kind. I thanked him and left. The afternoon light stretched long across the street. The rain had stopped, leaving behind the scent of new beginnings. As I walked toward the bus stop, the folder felt lighter in my hand. Not because the papers had changed, but because I had. When I reached home, the children were drawing in the living room. Evan was upstairs. Clara stood at the sink. She turned when she saw me and smiled without asking where I had been. I smiled back. We did not need the words yet. That evening, while they watched television, I returned to my room, opened the window, and let the night air in. The lavender moved in slow waves. I whispered into the darkness. Daniel, the soil still knows my name. Then I turned off the lamp and wrote the last line of the day. Tomorrow begins with courage disguised as calm. The next morning began without sunlight. The sky hung low, a dull silver lit over the village. I woke before anyone else and listened to the sound of the house breathing. The pipes knocked. The wood settled. Somewhere in the walls, a bird made its nest. I like to think the house approved of small creatures that refused to leave. I made tea and opened my notebook. The page waited patiently. I wrote the date, and beneath it, quiet can build mountains if you let it. Then I drew a small line under the words and closed the book. The children came down half-dressed and half awake. I helped them with buttons and shoes and breakfast. Clara hurried in behind them, apologizing to time as usual. She thanked me over her shoulder and left with a kiss in the air instead of on my cheek. I watched them go, their voices fading into the gray. The house and I stood in the silence together. I began to clean, not because it needed it, but because movement makes thought easier. While dusting the window ledge, I saw the garden gate swinging in the wind. It made a sound like an old question repeating itself. I went outside and fixed the latch. The grass was wet beneath my shoes. The lake shimmered faintly in the distance, holding the reflection of clouds that had forgotten how to rain. The air smelled of soil and memory. For a moment I let myself stand there, breathing it in, feeling that strange peace that arrives only when you stop asking why. When I returned inside, the phone rang again. I almost ignored it, then decided not to. The voice on the other end was Arthur. He said he had found an additional document, something Daniel had added to the will a few months before he passed. He said it was not urgent, but I should come by when I had time. I thanked him and agreed to visit in a few days. After the call, I made myself another cup of tea and sat at the table. The steam curled upward like the thoughts I could not yet name. I knew the document mattered, but not how. What I did know was that Daniel had never left anything unfinished without a reason. By noon, the clouds began to thin. Sunlight slipped through, cautious at first, then stronger. I opened the windows and let it touch the room. Dust sparkled in the air like confessions. I spent the afternoon baking bread the way Daniel had taught me. Knead gently, he used to say, or the dough will remember your anger. I kneaded gently. The smell filled the house by evening. When Clara and Evan came home, the children ran straight to the kitchen. They loved the smell of bread almost as much as they loved tearing it apart. I gave them each a piece and watched their faces soften. Evan said little during dinner. He ate quickly, his attention buried in his phone again. Clara asked him something about work and he answered with half a sentence. The silence between them was a bridge made of glass. I could see through it, see the cracks forming, but I stayed quiet. After dinner, I washed the dishes. Clara joined me. For a moment we moved together, water and towel, rinse and dry, as if no time had passed between the girl she once was and the woman she had become. She said softly, "I think Evan is under pressure. The company's been cutting hours. He's afraid of losing the position." I nodded. "Fear makes people forget their manners," I said. She looked at me with tired eyes. "He doesn't mean to be cruel." "I know," I said, "but meaning and doing are different things." She sighed, dried her hands, and changed the subject. We spoke about the children's school and Maggie's bakery and the church fair next weekend. When she went upstairs, I stayed at the sink, my hands still in the warm water long after the last dish was clean. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with the bread knife in front of me, not as a threat, but as a symbol. Sharp, necessary, honest. I thought of the papers in the cedar box, the letters, the carving on the mirror. I thought of Daniel's handwriting, patient and sure. "This house is mine." The words echoed in the quiet. I realized that they were never about ownership. They were about belonging. Daniel had built the house as a gift of belonging, not just for him, not even just for me, but for what we had created together. I stood, walked to the mirror, and touched the letters again. The reflection showed a woman with lines around her eyes, hair like frost, a back still straight. I smiled at her. She looked like someone who had been waiting for permission to remember her strength. I whispered to the reflection, "You are not invisible." The next morning, I took the bus to town. Arthur greeted me with the same calm he always carried, the calm of someone who had made peace with paperwork. He handed me a thin envelope sealed with a wax stamp. "Daniel left this for you," he said. "He asked that it be delivered only if you came back here on your own." Inside was a short note. It read, "Haven, if the house ever feels too quiet, open the second drawer of my desk. The truth sleeps there." I thanked Arthur and left, the envelope folded in my coat pocket. Back home, I went straight to Daniel's study. It had become more of a storage room over the years, filled with boxes of books, old tools, forgotten frames. I found the desk under a sheet of dust and opened the second drawer. Inside was another envelope, yellowed with time. It contained a legal deed confirming that the property would remain in my name for as long as I lived, and after my passing, it would go to a foundation Daniel had proposed, the Craig Heritage Trust. At the bottom was a line written in his hand, "If love turns into noise, let the earth hold the quiet." I sat in the chair and cried, not from sadness but from recognition. The truth had not been hiding. It had been waiting. That night, I wrote in my notebook again. He left the answer inside the drawer. The house knows where I belong. I looked around the room, at the walls Daniel had painted, the floor he had laid. The moonlight touched everything evenly. For the first time in a long while, I felt the weight of fear begin to slide off my shoulders. I closed the notebook and blew out the candle. As darkness settled, I whispered one last thought to the house. "Tomorrow I will begin again." And the house, in its own quiet way, seemed to whisper back. The next day dawned brighter than the week before. The kind of brightness that feels cautious, as if the sun itself is uncertain whether to intrude. I woke early, my thoughts already waiting for me. The dream from the night before still hovered at the edge of memory. Daniel stood beside the lake again, his hand raised, pointing toward the house. The wind had moved his hair, and he smiled that quiet smile that always meant, trust the moment. I dressed and went downstairs. The house smelled of night and lavender. I boiled water and poured tea, letting the steam rise into my face. My hands no longer trembled the way they used to. I carried the cup to the table and opened my notebook. Morning calm, courage steady, truth near. The words came easily. Writing them felt like unlocking something deep inside the walls. Around 7, I heard footsteps on the stairs. Evan entered the kitchen, already dressed for work. He glanced at me, expression unreadable, then at the clock. "You're up early," he said. "Always," I replied. He poured himself coffee, the sound louder than necessary. He didn't sit. He never did unless Clara was in the room. He looked out the window for a moment, then turned back to me. "You know the bills come out of my account now, right?" "Yes," I said. He hesitated, waiting for me to say more. When I didn't, he cleared his throat. "I've been thinking. Maybe it's time you considered other arrangements." "Other arrangements," I repeated. He nodded, sipping his coffee. "There's a retirement home near the coast. Nice place. Quiet, they have gardens." I smiled, a small controlled smile. "Gardens sound lovely." He seemed relieved by my calmness. He probably thought I had accepted it. That was the moment I knew he had never really looked at me. Clara entered then, her hair damp from the shower. She looked between us, sensing the weight in the air. "What's going on?" "Nothing," I said. "We were talking about gardens." Evan gave a short laugh and picked up his keys. "I'm late," he said, and left the house without another word. When the door closed, Clara stared at me. "Did he say something again? He's just worried about money," I said. She frowned. "He shouldn't talk to you like that." "He talks to everyone like that," I said. "It's his way of being certain he exists." She didn't answer. She sat and rubbed her temples. "Mom, maybe he's right. Maybe you'd be happier somewhere peaceful." I looked at her then, really looked. My daughter, so much of Daniel in her face but none of his quiet. A woman who had learned to survive by apologizing for others. "Do you think peace is a place?" I asked her, "or a choice?" She blinked. "I don't know." "That's all right," I said. "Most people don't until they have to choose it." She looked at me for a moment longer, then stood and kissed my forehead. "I have to take the kids to school," she said softly. When she left, I sat for a long time, staring at the light shifting across the table. Their words echoed in my mind: retirement home, quiet, peace, and I realized something. They wanted to move me, not because they hated me, but because my presence reminded them of who they used to be. The house, the memories, Daniel's ghost, all of it pressed against the lives they were trying to build without roots. I finished my tea and went upstairs to Daniel's study again. The papers were still spread out across the desk. I placed my hand on the deed and felt the pulse of ownership, not as property, but as a story that began long before Evan's paycheck or Clara's exhaustion. I spent the next hour sorting through drawers, finding more fragments of our lives. Receipts from the lumberyard, photographs of the children playing by the lake, a postcard Daniel once sent me from Scotland that said simply, "You are home." At noon, I packed a small bag with the documents and walked to the bus stop. The air had turned crisp, a reminder that summer was leaving for good. I took the bus to town again and went straight to Arthur's office. He looked up from his desk when I entered, surprise softening into recognition. "Haven, twice in 1 week," he said with a smile. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" I set the bag on his desk. "I need to discuss the house," I said. "I believe it's time to make some decisions." He nodded slowly. "What kind of decisions?" "The kind that keep promises," I said. He gestured for me to sit. We went through the documents together, the deed, the will, the letter. As he read, his expression changed from mild curiosity to quiet respect. "Daniel planned well," he said. "He wanted to protect you." "He did," I said. "And now I want to protect what he built." "You mean the property?" "I mean the meaning," I said. "This house has been a shelter for generations. It should stay that way." Arthur leaned back. "What do you have in mind?" I told him. My voice was calm, but my heart beat steady with the rhythm of certainty. When I finished, he looked at me for a long time. "That's a generous choice," he said. "But are you sure?" "I'm sure," I said. "Sometimes keeping something means learning how to let it go." He nodded. "I'll prepare the papers." "Thank you," I said. When I left his office, the afternoon light hit me like clarity. I walked through the square, past the bakery, past the church, past the children playing by the fountain. Each sound seemed sharper, more alive. It was as if the world had been waiting for me to make this choice before it could continue spinning. By the time I returned home, the house seemed different, the air lighter, the silence warmer. I placed the documents in the cedar box and closed it gently. That evening, when Clara came home, I cooked her favorite meal, roasted chicken with thyme and lemon. The smell filled every corner of the house. She looked surprised when she saw the table set neatly. "What's the occasion?" she asked. "Nothing," I said. "Just gratitude." She smiled and helped me light the candles. For the first time in years, we ate slowly without rushing. The children laughed, Evan even managed a small joke. For one brief hour, the house remembered what it was built for. After dinner, I went to my room and wrote in my notebook, "The decision is made. They don't know yet. The soil will speak for me." I closed the book and looked out the window. The moon had risen, clear and unbroken. I whispered into the night, "Daniel, tomorrow begins." I didn't know then that the next morning would change everything. I woke to the sound of wind moving through the trees. It was still early, not yet 6. The light in the room was the faint color of milk. I sat up slowly, feeling that strange calm that comes when something inside you has already decided its next step. The house felt awake too, like it had been holding its breath through the night. Downstairs, the floorboards creaked under my feet. I made tea and sat by the window. The garden outside glowed with dew. Everything looked tender, almost breakable. I thought of Daniel and how he used to say that mornings were promises disguised as chores. I smiled at that memory. I heard a car door close outside, Evan leaving early again. But this time, he didn't drive away. The sound of his voice carried faintly from the garage. I froze, the cup halfway to my lips. He was on the phone. I couldn't hear the words at first, just the tone, sharp, dismissive. Then, as the wind shifted, his words became clear. "She's still here," he said. "Yes, the old woman, Haven. What do you think I'm supposed to do, carry her out myself? Clara won't say it, but she knows it can't go on. The house would sell for a good price if she'd just move out." There was a pause, then he laughed softly. "No, she doesn't know a thing. She thinks she's lucky we let her stay. The place isn't even in her name anymore, it's ours. At least that's what Clara believes." I stood in the hallway, my breath small and careful. The phone clicked as he ended the call. I heard the garage door close, then his footsteps fading toward the car. The engine started. A moment later, silence. I stood there a long time. My hands were cold around the cup. He was wrong about one thing. The house was mine. Legally, spiritually, entirely. Daniel had made sure of that. And yet I felt no triumph, no anger. Only a slow, deep understanding. I walked back to the kitchen and placed the cup on the table. The reflection of the window shimmered across the tea's surface like a second world. I whispered, "Daniel, you were right. Silence shows who listens." I went to the cedar box, opened it, and took out the folder with the deeds and letters. The paper felt heavy but familiar. The ink had faded slightly, but the truth remained sharp. Haven E. Craig, owner. The name looked both like me and beyond me, as if it belonged to a version of myself I was still growing into. That morning, I called Arthur. I told him to finalize the documents we had discussed. He didn't ask why, and I didn't explain. Some understandings don't need air to breathe. He said the papers would be ready by the end of the week. The day stretched quietly. Clara was at work, the children at school. I moved through the house like a curator in a private museum. Each room told its own story. The faint mark on the wall where Daniel had measured Clara's height when she was 6. The chipped corner of the kitchen counter where he once dropped a bowl of blueberries and laughed so hard he couldn't breathe. The crack in the ceiling shaped like a river that seemed to flow toward the window. These weren't flaws, they were the house's handwriting. Around noon, Maggie came by with a basket of bread and jam. She didn't knock, she never did. She just entered, her voice filling the room like sunlight. "You look different," she said, studying me. "Less breakable." I smiled. Maybe I remembered something I'd forgotten. "Care to tell me what that is?" "That silence isn't surrender," I said. She raised an eyebrow. "Then what is it?" "It's waiting for the right echo," I replied. She laughed, shaking her head. "You and your riddles, Haven. One day you'll turn them into a book." "Maybe I already have," I said, tapping my notebook. We had tea and spoke of ordinary things, her customers, the coming winter, the children's mischief. But beneath the small talk, my mind was moving, patient and precise. I knew what I had to do. That evening, Clara returned home exhausted. I told her dinner was ready and watched her face soften. While she ate, I asked about her work, about the children, about the things that filled her days. Her answers came slowly, half distracted. Then she looked up at me. "Mom, Evan said you might want to start looking for a place near the coast. Somewhere quiet." I nodded. "He mentioned that. And?" She asked carefully. "I told him I would think about it," I said. She smiled with relief, not seeing the small truth beneath the words. I wasn't lying. I would think about it. I already was, just not in the way they imagined. Later that night, when the house fell quiet, I went back to the study. The smell of old paper and cedar filled the air. I lit a single candle and spread the documents across the desk. The flame trembled slightly, its light moving over the ink like breath. I whispered the words on the deed. Haven E. Craig. Daniel had believed in this house, in me, in what we built together. I would honor that belief, not by clinging to it, but by giving it a voice again. I picked up my pen and began writing a letter, not to Arthur, not to Clara, not even to Evan. It was to the house itself. My dear home, I wrote, you have watched kindness become noise and silence become defense. You have listened without judgment. Soon you will rest, not as property but as memory. I will free you so that no one can call you theirs for the wrong reasons. You belong to the earth now, to Daniel, to peace. I sealed the letter and placed it inside the cedar box. Then I closed the lid and whispered, tomorrow we begin to speak. When I blew out the candle, smoke curled into the air like a spirit leaving a body. The darkness felt different that night, not heavy, but alive, as if it too was waiting for dawn. I lay in bed, the sound of wind pressing gently against the window. For the first time in years, I didn't feel trapped inside my own house. I felt like its heartbeat, and somewhere deep in the stillness I could almost hear Daniel's voice again, not as a ghost but as approval. Good, he seemed to say. Now they will learn who you are. I closed my eyes and let sleep take me, not as escape, but as a promise that morning would bring change. The morning came pale and cold, a thin layer of frost dressing the garden. I could see my breath as I stood by the window, watching the light crawl across the grass. There was peace in that kind of cold, the kind that wakes the blood but asks you to move carefully. I made tea, wrote a single sentence in my notebook, today I act, and closed it. The words didn't tremble. They stood there, clear and final. After breakfast, I wrapped my scarf and gloves, placed the folder inside my bag, and left the house. The sky above the village was soft and empty, the kind of color that waits to be filled by decisions. The bus came late, as it always did, and the air inside smelled of damp coats and the faint sweetness of bread someone had carried earlier. When I arrived in town, the streets were shining from a night's rain. The bakery windows fogged from warmth, the bookstore smelled of ink, and Arthur's office sat quietly above both. I climbed the stairs slowly, the wood creaking beneath each step like a whisper of approval. Arthur looked up when I entered. Haven, he said with a smile, I thought I'd be calling you today. You were right, I said, I'm ready. He gestured to the chair across from him. Everything is in order. I prepared the documents you requested. All that's left is your signature. I sat, pulled off my gloves, and looked at the papers before me. The words seemed simple, transfer of ownership, charitable donation, preservation trust, but their weight was not in ink. Their weight was in what they meant. This was not about revenge. It was about setting the story right. Arthur placed a pen beside my hand. You're certain about this? Yes, I said. Daniel would have wanted it. He believed homes should hold life, not arguments. He nodded slowly. Then you'll be giving this house to the Craig Heritage Foundation? I will, I said. Let it be a place where no one feels unwelcome again, a refuge, not a possession. Arthur watched me for a long time. You're braver than most people I know. I smiled. No. Just slower to forget what matters. He chuckled softly, then guided me through the pages. I signed each line carefully, my name moving like a promise across the paper. Haven E. Craig. With each signature, I felt a small piece of something old leave me, fear, guilt, hesitation. What stayed behind was stillness. When it was done, he gathered the documents and sealed them in a thick envelope. Once these are processed, he said, the trust will take effect immediately. The property will be protected under your name until the foundation's full transfer. Thank you, Arthur, I said. You've always known how to handle quiet things. He smiled at that. It's a skill that keeps me in business. We shared tea in his small office while the rain began again outside. I told him about Daniel's laughter, about Clara's children, about how sometimes silence isn't the absence of sound, but the beginning of clarity. He listened as if my words were old songs he almost remembered. When I left his office, the town had changed color. The rain made the cobblestones shine like black glass. I walked slowly, not minding the drizzle. It felt like the world was washing itself clean. I stopped at the bakery. Maggie saw me through the window and waved, flour on her apron. She came to the door, eyes bright. You've done it, haven't you? I smiled. I think so. She handed me a loaf still warm from the oven. Then take this for courage. Fresh bread for a fresh life. Thank you, I said. You always know when to feed the right kind of hunger, she laughed. You'll tell me everything later. Later, I promised and walked home. The bus ride back felt shorter, maybe because my thoughts were lighter. I looked out at the field sliding past, gray, open, endless, and realized I didn't feel small in the world anymore. I felt present. When I arrived, the house greeted me with the familiar creak of its door, the faint smell of lemon polish, and the steady rhythm of rain against the glass. I placed the bread on the counter and the envelope in the cedar box. I didn't lock it this time. I stood in the middle of the kitchen and said quietly, "It's done." The house didn't answer, but it didn't need to. The air changed slightly, like the pause between heartbeats. That evening, when the family returned, I made soup and poured wine. Everyone seemed surprised by my calmness. Evan made a comment about the weather. Clara smiled weakly, saying the house felt warmer tonight. The children chattered about school, their laughter bouncing off the walls. I sat and watched them, the way one watches the sea, aware of its power but not afraid of its waves anymore. After dinner, Evan stayed behind in the kitchen. He looked uneasy, as if searching for a way to speak without exposing himself. "Clara told me you've been to town a lot lately," he said. "I have," I replied. He hesitated. "You're not doing anything about the house, are you?" I met his eyes. "Everything about the house is already being done." He frowned, confused. "What's that supposed to mean?" "You'll understand soon," I said. "Sometimes silence finishes the sentences people can't." He opened his mouth to say something but then closed it. He left the room without another word. When I was alone, I wrote in my notebook again. "Today I signed my freedom. They don't see it yet. They will." I closed the book, blew out the candle, and listened to the rain ease into a whisper. For the first time in many years, I felt Daniel's presence not as memory, but as companionship. "You'd be proud," I murmured into the dark, and I heard him as faint as breath. "Always, Haven, always." The next few days passed in a strange kind of stillness. It was not peace exactly, more like the breath a room takes before a storm. The papers were with Arthur now. He had promised to call when everything was filed. Until then, I lived my days as if nothing had changed. In truth, everything had. I woke before dawn each morning and walked the garden. The grass bowed under the weight of dew. The lavender bent with the wind but never broke. The lake lay quiet, a mirror for all that refused to speak. I walked the path Daniel once built from old stones. Some were cracked, others still firm. I liked that about them, the mix of endurance and imperfection. When I returned to the kitchen, I made breakfast for everyone. Evan always came down first. He looked at me differently now, not with suspicion yet, but with a kind of awareness, like a man who senses the rules have shifted though no one has told him why. He tried small conversation. The price of gas, the weather, the neighbor's dog barking at night, I answered politely. He didn't know how to fill silence when it wasn't afraid of him. Clara came next. She was quieter than usual. Her eyes were tired, her hair loosely tied. "Mom," she said, "thank you for dinner last night. The kids loved it." "You're welcome," I said. "It was a good evening." She nodded. "It was." She hesitated. "Evan been stressed about work and maybe about money. He says the mortgage payments keep rising." I looked at her, my voice gentle. "That's strange," she frowned. "What do you mean?" "Because there is no mortgage, Clara," she blinked. "What? This house has been paid off for more than 20 years. She stared at me, confused. "But Evan said, people often say things to feel in control," I said. "Sometimes they even convince themselves it's true." She didn't know what to say. She stirred her coffee and left the room, her footsteps soft against the floorboards. I watched her go and felt neither triumph nor anger. Only a small ache that truth often arrives like a mirror, kind but unforgiving. That afternoon, I sat in the study and read through Daniel's letters again. Each one a quiet conversation between what was and what is. I realized how often he had spoken of legacy not as property, but as a kind of gentleness passed through hands. "Let the house teach," he had written once. "Even when we're gone, it will remember how to be kind." I closed the letter and pressed my fingers to the wood of his desk. It felt warm, as if the house approved of what was coming. 2 days later, the call came. Arthur's calm voice filled the receiver. "It's done, Haven. Everything is filed and signed. The property now belongs to the Craig Heritage Foundation. You remain caretaker for life, and afterward it becomes public land protected. No one can sell it." I exhaled slowly. "Thank you, Arthur. I'll send the copies to you," he said. "Keep them safe." "They already are," I replied. When I hung up, I stood for a moment, letting the silence deepen. It was not emptiness. It was fullness. The kind that comes when a decision finally finishes breathing. That evening, the sky turned the color of copper. The wind picked up, bending the trees. The children ran through the house laughing, chasing one another with ribbons of light from their flashlights. Their joy filled every corner, and for a few minutes I could almost forget the tension that waited beneath. Evan came home late. His face looked pinched from the wind and whatever conversations had drained him at work. He threw his keys on the counter. "Why is the heating on again?" he asked sharply. "Do you know how much electricity costs?" I didn't answer. I simply looked at him, not unkindly but steadily. He hesitated, the words faltering. "I'm just saying, we should be careful with money." "Money," I said quietly, "isn't what makes a home." He frowned. "You always have an answer, don't you?" "Only when the question deserves one," I said. He stared at me, unsure how to read the calm in my voice. Then he shook his head and left the room. The door closed with a thud softer than his pride. Later, Clara came downstairs. She looked nervous. "Mom," she said, "did you talk to Arthur lately?" "Yes." Her eyes searched my face. "About what?" "The future of this house," she swallowed. "What about it?" I smiled gently. "It's safe now." "What do you mean safe?" "I mean no one can take it or sell it or use it as a bargaining chip in their fears." She looked at me for a long time, her lips parting but no sound coming. I could see a dozen thoughts passing behind her eyes: relief, confusion, disbelief, gratitude. Finally, she whispered, "I don't understand." "You don't have to, not yet," I said. "You'll see when it's time." She nodded slowly, as if afraid to disturb the balance of the air. Then she hugged me unexpectedly, and I held her tight. I felt her heartbeat against mine, fast, uncertain, but real. When she pulled back, she said softly, "You're different lately." "Maybe I just remembered who I am," I said. That night, after everyone went to bed, I sat by the kitchen window again. The rain had stopped. The moon rested on the lake like a coin in water. I opened my notebook and wrote, "The deed is done. The silence has become strength. The house knows." I closed the notebook and turned off the lamp. The dark didn't scare me anymore. It felt like company. Upstairs, the boards creaked softly as if Daniel was walking the hallway again, checking that everything was in its place. I smiled into the stillness. "Sleep well," I whispered to the house. "We're almost free." And in that moment, I could swear the walls exhaled, long and slow, as if they had been waiting years to hear those words. The following morning came softly, as if afraid to disturb the house. The air held a faint chill that carried the scent of rain mixed with the sweetness of old wood. I woke before the light reached the window and lay still, listening. The wind moved gently through the trees, and I thought of how time changes its tone depending on how you choose to hear it. When I finally rose, I made tea and stood by the mirror. My reflection looked older, yes, but also freer. The lines on my face no longer felt like failures of time, but like a language the years had written on my skin. I touched the edge of the mirror where Daniel's carving hid beneath the layer of polish. "This house is mine." It still glimmered faintly when the morning light struck it. I smiled. After breakfast, I began to sort through my things. Not the way one prepares to move, but the way one prepares to simplify. I opened drawers, folded clothes, stacked books into neat piles. Every sound felt amplified, every object alive with memory. I found old letters from Clara's childhood, her drawings of the lake, and a photograph of Daniel and me standing under the apple tree the year we planted it. I placed each item carefully on the bed, not with sadness, but with a sense of ceremony. There is a tenderness in knowing what to take and what to leave behind. The house was quiet until mid-morning when Clara came downstairs. She stopped at the doorway of my room and looked at the spread on the bed. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Tidying," I said. "I thought it was time." She frowned. "It looks like you're packing." "In a way," I said, "but not to leave, not yet." She stepped closer. "Are you planning something?" "Only peace," I said. "It takes space to grow." She smiled uncertainly, not understanding, but too tired to argue. She sat beside me and picked up one of the photographs. "You and Dad looked so happy here," she said quietly. "We were," I said, "because we knew what we were building. We didn't need it to be perfect, only honest." She nodded, and for a while we sat in silence, both looking at the same picture but seeing different worlds inside it. After she left, I continued my quiet work. I moved through the rooms, dusting, straightening, saying goodbye without speaking the words. I lingered in the hallway where the children's drawings still hung, faded from sunlight. I touched the wall beside them and whispered, "Remember laughter." By noon, the house felt lighter. It was as if it had exhaled years of tension. I took a walk around the garden. The lake shimmered under a soft wind. The apple tree bent slightly, heavy with fruit. I picked one, polished it on my sleeve, and took a bite. The taste was sharp at first, then sweet. It reminded me of the first harvest Daniel and I shared here. I sat on the old wooden bench near the hedge, the same one where Daniel once told me that love was not about keeping but about tending. He said, "You can't own what you love, Haven. You can only care for it." I closed my eyes and repeated those words. They sounded different now. They had grown into something larger than the two of us. When I went back inside, I found a letter slipped under my door. It was from Arthur. He wrote that the paperwork had been processed completely. The Craig Heritage Foundation now officially existed, and the property transfer would be announced within the month. He thanked me for my grace and added a line that made me smile. "Few people choose freedom so gently." I folded the letter and placed it in the cedar box. That evening, I cooked early. Evan came home first, looking worn and restless. He went straight to the kitchen and poured himself a drink. "You've been busy," he said, nodding toward the tidy room. "I have," I said. "There's always work to be done before peace." He gave me a puzzled look. "Peace?" "Yes," I said. "The kind that doesn't need permission." He frowned. "You always talk like you're quoting someone." "Maybe I am," I said softly. "Maybe I'm quoting the part of myself you've never met." He shook his head, muttered something about nonsense, and left the room. When Clara and the children arrived, the evening brightened again. We ate together, laughter returning in small, cautious bursts. The children told stories about school and friends. For a while, it almost felt like it used to be. After dinner, I tucked Lily into bed. She asked, "Grandma, are you going somewhere?" I smiled. "Why do you ask that?" "Because you look like someone who's saying goodbye." I brushed her hair away from her face. "Maybe I'm saying thank you instead." "To who?" she whispered. "To the house," I said, "for letting me stay this long." She giggled sleepily. "Houses don't listen." I kissed her forehead. "Oh, some do." When the house fell quiet again, I sat by the kitchen window, my notebook open. I wrote, "The earth knows, the walls know. I have become the silence that once frightened me." Then I turned to the last blank page and drew a small circle in the center. Around it, I wrote one word: tomorrow. I closed the book and placed it in the cedar box with Daniel's letters and Arthur's documents. I locked the box and slipped the key into my pocket. As I climbed the stairs, I looked back one last time. The candle on the table flickered gently, its flame bowing but not breaking. I whispered, "Soon." Upstairs, I lay awake for a long time, listening to the soft hum of the house. Somewhere outside, an owl called once, then again. I imagined Daniel hearing it too. "Almost," I said into the dark. "Just a little longer." And the silence that answered felt like understanding. The next day passed like the pause between breaths. The air outside was colder now. Autumn had come fully, the kind of cold that makes sound travel differently. The trees along the lake had begun to shift from green to gold, their reflections trembling in the water like coins of light. I moved slowly through the morning. Tea, notebook, window, my quiet rituals. The house seemed to mirror me. It had stopped creaking as if it too was listening. I felt the weight of the decision resting gently on my shoulders, not as a burden but as a shawl of inevitability. Clara had gone into town with the children. Evan was still asleep upstairs. That gave me the kind of solitude that feels sacred. I took the cedar box from the shelf and placed it on the table. I unlocked it one last time. Inside were all the fragments of my life, letters, deeds, Daniel's handwriting, my notebook. I touched each thing in turn. There was a peace in knowing I had kept them safe. I took a clean sheet of paper and began to write. "My dearest Clara," I began. The pen felt steady in my hand. "You once asked me what I was planning. I didn't answer because the truth needed to grow quietly first. By the time you read this, the papers will already be filed. This house no longer belongs to any of us, not in the way you think. It belongs to something larger, to memory, to the earth, to kindness. I've given it back to what built it. I know this will confuse you at first. But one day, when you walk these halls and hear only the sound of your own breath, you will understand that I did this not to take anything from you, but to return something to all of us. You have built your life on worry. I want you to build it on calm. Do not let Evan's fears become yours. Let the children play here when they wish, but never cage this place with ownership. It was born to be shared. I will leave tomorrow. I don't know where I will go, but I trust the road will recognize me. Do not follow. The quiet is calling, and for once I am ready to answer. All my love, Mother." I folded the letter neatly and placed it on top of the box. I tied the twine around it the way Daniel used to tie our garden flowers, gentle, not tight. Then I slid the key beneath the vase on the windowsill where Clara would eventually find it. The rest of the day drifted by. I baked one last loaf of bread, the smell filling the house with something that felt like farewell. Evan came downstairs around noon, still in his robe. He sniffed the air and smiled faintly. "Smells good," he said. "Bread always does," I replied. He poured coffee, glancing toward the cedar box on the table. "You've been busy with that thing for weeks, sorting old papers." "Something like that," I said. "You should let me take a look. I might help with whatever." "No," I said quietly but firmly. He blinked, startled by the edge in my tone. "Excuse me? It's not yours to look at," I said. He frowned. "You don't have to be secretive, we're family." "Yes," I said, "and family should learn to trust silence." He looked as if he wanted to argue but couldn't find the right words. He shrugged, muttered something about errands, and left the house. After he was gone, I exhaled. I walked through each room, touching the walls lightly as I passed. The walls no longer felt cold. They were warm, almost breathing with me. In the living room, I stood by the fireplace and looked up at Daniel's photograph, him laughing mid-sentence, eyes bright, shoulders caught in sunlight. "You'd like this ending," I whispered. It's quiet, but it tells the truth. As dusk settled, I lit candles one by one. Their flames flickered softly, casting shadows that looked like memories walking through the air. I cooked a simple dinner for Clara and the children when they returned. The conversation was light stories of the fair, the children's new books, the smell of cinnamon from the bakery. I smiled and nodded, answering when needed, storing every detail like a keepsake. When the children went to bed, Clara lingered in the kitchen. She poured tea for us both. "You seem calm," she said. "I am," I replied. "The house feels calm too." She looked around and smiled faintly. "It does." "Clara," I said softly, "whatever happens, promise me one thing." "What?" "Don't argue with what's already at peace." She looked puzzled. "What do you mean?" I smiled. "You'll know soon enough." She nodded slowly, uncertain, and kissed my cheek goodnight. When she was gone, I sat at the table for a long while. The candles burned lower, the wax spilling onto the wooden surface like melted time. I opened the window and let the cold night air in. The smell of the lake drifted through, sharp, clean, infinite. I whispered into the darkness, "It's almost time." The house answered in small ways, the soft pop of wood contracting, the whisper of wind between the shutters, the faint creak of the floor above me. It sounded like a heartbeat. I packed a small bag, just clothes, a notebook, and Daniel's photograph. I placed the bag by the door. The rest of me was already gone. Upstairs, I checked on the children once more. They slept peacefully, faces soft with dreams. I brushed a strand of hair from Lily's forehead and smiled. Then I went to my room, sat on the edge of the bed, and turned off the lamp. In the darkness, I could see everything clearly. The outlines of my life, the rhythm of choices, the weight of silence. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of the unknown. It felt like coming home to something bigger than the house itself. I closed my eyes and whispered one final thought to the man who had started it all. "Daniel, it's done. The story belongs to the earth now." And in the stillness that followed, I heard his answer, faint and warm. "Well done, Haven, well done." The morning began with quiet so deep it felt unnatural. The house had a habit of waking early, the pipes sighing, the stairs groaning, the floorboards whispering under small, unseen movements. But that morning, nothing stirred. The air was heavy, like the pause after a question too large to answer. Clara woke first. The clock on her bedside table read 7. She stretched, listened, and frowned. No kettle whistling, no movement from the kitchen, no soft humming from her mother's room. The silence felt thick. She pulled on her robe and went downstairs. The kitchen light was still off. The air smelled faintly of lavender and something else, the ghost of yesterday's bread. On the table sat the cedar box. The key lay beneath the small blue vase, just where Haven had left it. A folded letter rested on top. Clara stared at it for a long moment before reaching out. Her fingers trembled slightly as she unfolded the paper. The handwriting was unmistakable, calm, graceful, deliberate. She read every word slowly, as if her mother might still walk in and finish the sentences aloud. When she reached the end, her breath caught. "Oh, Mom," she whispered. Her eyes filled before she even realized she was crying. She sank into the nearest chair, the letter trembling in her hands. Evan came down a few minutes later, tying his tie with the distracted precision of someone already late. He stopped when he saw her. "What's going on?" Clara didn't answer. She slid the letter across the table. He hesitated, then picked it up and began to read. His jaw tightened with each line. When he finished, he exhaled through his nose, sharp and disbelieving. "She's out of her mind," he said. "She gave it away. She gave the damn house away." Clara shook her head. "No, she gave it back." "Read it again, Evan." She knew exactly what she was doing. He looked at her, incredulous. "You can't actually defend this." "I'm not defending anything," she said quietly. "I'm trying to understand." "Understand?" he snapped. "She's just walked out. No phone, no plan, and this," he waved the letter. "This is madness." Clara stood and opened the cedar box. Inside were Daniel's letters, the deed, and Haven's notebook. She ran her fingers across the first page. The ink was soft and faded, the lines neat and unhurried. "What is that?" Evan asked. "Her journal," she said. "Maybe it will explain." He scoffed but didn't stop her. She opened it carefully. The first line read, "Silence is not what happens when words end. It's what begins when truth finally speaks." Clara turned the page, reading entries written in Haven's measured hand. Notes about mornings, about the garden, about Daniel. And then, a sentence that made her breath still. "If I ever disappear, do not search for me in fear. Search for me in peace. I will be where quiet things go to rest." She closed the notebook, her throat tight. "She's gone," she said softly, "and she doesn't want us to follow." Evan paced the kitchen, anger tightening his movements. "She had no right, that house." "It wasn't yours," Clara said, her voice low but sharp enough to stop him. He froze. What did you say? It wasn't yours, Evan, not legally, not even morally. She told me once the house was paid off long before you moved in. It was never ours to control. He shook his head. You can't just, she can't. She did, Clara said. The clock ticked on the wall, each sound landing like a heartbeat. Outside, the wind began to rise. Evan turned away, running his hand through his hair. We have bills, Clara, debts, the kids. What are we supposed to do now? Clara looked at him, eyes steady. Maybe stop pretending everything has to be owned to matter. He glared at her, but she didn't flinch. The truth had already rooted itself in her voice. They both stood in silence for a long time. Then Clara said, I'm going to the lake. What for? To see if she's there. Evan started to protest, but stopped when he saw her face. She was already reaching for her coat. Outside, the air bit at her skin. The path to the lake was still wet from last night's rain. Each step felt heavy, as if the earth itself wanted her to slow down. The water waded ahead, still and silver, holding the reflection of the sky. Clara called out softly, Mom! Her voice echoed across the water. Nothing answered but the rustle of trees. She walked to the edge of the dock. The wood creaked beneath her feet. On the railing lay a single apple, polished and bright against the gray morning. She picked it up and turned it in her hand. There was something carved faintly into the skin for us. Her throat tightened. She looked out at the water and whispered, You didn't leave. You just changed rooms. The wind moved through the trees then, slow and low, as if agreeing. She stood there until the sun climbed higher. Then she turned back toward the house. When she entered, Evan was sitting at the table, the letter open before him again. His anger had faded into something smaller, confusion, maybe even regret. What now? He asked quietly. Clara sat across from him and looked around the room. The sunlight had begun to fill it, touching the walls, the floor, the old clock. For the first time, the house didn't feel like hers, but she didn't mind. It felt right. Now, she said softly, we listen. To what? To the silence, she said. It's the only thing that ever told the truth here. A week passed before the letter from Arthur arrived. It came folded neatly in an envelope stamped with his firm's crest. Clara found it in the mailbox one morning while the children were still asleep. She recognized the handwriting immediately. She brought it to the kitchen, poured herself coffee, and sat down before opening it. Evan watched from across the table, saying nothing. The letter was short. Dear Mrs. Bennet, your mother met with me 2 days before her departure to finalize her final instructions. She asked that I write to confirm her intentions should any questions arise. The Craig Heritage Foundation has been legally established, and your mother, Mrs. Haven Craig, appointed herself as its first and only trustee during her lifetime. The property now serves as the Foundation's central retreat, dedicated to the preservation of art, writing, and quiet reflection. She has arranged for you and your children to be honorary guests of the estate at any time, but ownership and management will remain independent. She also requested that I deliver a sealed envelope to you exactly 1 week after her departure. You will find it enclosed. With kind regards, Arthur Finn. Beneath the letter was a smaller envelope, cream-colored, sealed with wax. The seal was pressed with a delicate imprint of a leaf, Daniel's old stamp. Clara held it for a long moment before breaking it open. Inside was a single page written in her mother's hand. My dearest Clara, if you're reading this, then you know by now what I have done. You will hear many words for it, selfish, strange, sentimental. None of them are right. This house is not a thing that can be given away. It was never truly ours. It was a living thing, a keeper of laughter, of patience, of forgiveness. Daniel and I built it from more than stone. We built it from the wish that you would someday live without fear of loss. I didn't leave because I wanted to disappear. I left because I wanted you to arrive here in this quiet understanding that love is not about possession. The foundation will take care of the house. Arthur will make sure it remains what it was always meant to be, open, kind, unowned. The lake will still reflect the trees. The lavender will still grow by the window. The walls will still know your name. As for me, I'm not far. I've gone to the hills Daniel once dreamed of retiring to. The cottage there was waiting, smaller, simpler, but full of space for sky. Don't try to find me quickly. Let the silence teach you first. When you're ready, you'll know the path, with all the love that silence can carry, Mother. Clara sat very still after reading. Her eyes filled, but the tears didn't fall. She folded the letter slowly, as if not to disturb the air. Evan broke the silence. So she's alive? Yes, Clara said softly. Of course she is. She just walked away. She walked home, Clara said. He frowned. To where? Clara looked out the window. The morning light touched the apple tree, the lake behind it glimmering faintly. To where peace lives. Evan rubbed his forehead. So that's it? She gets to vanish and leave us with this. Clara smiled faintly. She didn't leave us with nothing. She left us with the truth. That's more than most people manage. She stood and went to the window. The house looked different now. Not smaller or emptier, just clearer like the air after rain. She could almost feel her mother's presence in the way the curtains moved, the way the sunlight reached across the floor. That afternoon, she took the children to the garden. They ran through the tall grass, laughing. She sat on the old wooden bench, the same one where Daniel and Haven had once planned their future. She opened her mother's notebook and began to read. The final page was written just days before Haven's departure. Tomorrow is not leaving. It is returning to what waits when noise ends. The earth will hold me. The house will hold them. This is not an ending. It's the echo learning to speak. Clara closed the notebook and looked up. The lake rippled under the wind, its surface catching the light like liquid glass. For a moment, she thought she saw movement, a small figure in the distance, standing by the far shore, dressed in a long coat, hair silver in the sun. It was too far to be sure. The figure raised a hand slowly, like a wave or a blessing, then turned and disappeared into the trees. Clara didn't move. She simply smiled. That evening, she placed the notebook back in the cedar box and set it on the table where it had always belonged. The children helped her bake bread. The smell filled the house again, warm, sweet, alive. Evan came to the kitchen doorway and watched them quietly. The sharpness had gone from his face. "Do you think she'll come back?" he asked. Clara looked up from the dough. Maybe she never left. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, Clara walked through the house alone. She touched the walls the way her mother once had. In the quiet, she heard a sound, faint but clear. It was the hum of the floorboards, the slow breath of wood. A voice that wasn't words but meaning. She could feel it more than hear it. Peace isn't a place, it seemed to say. It's what remains when everything unnecessary has been set down. She smiled through her tears. "Good night, Mom," she whispered. The wind outside moved through the trees, soft and low. The lavender brushed the window pane. And for a moment, just before she turned out the light, she could swear she heard her mother's voice, clear as the first morning she ever remembered. "I told you, Clara. The soil knows our name. The hills are softer than I remembered. The first morning I woke here, the sky stretched wide and unbroken, the kind of blue that feels like forgiveness. The air carried the scent of pine and smoke from the neighbor's chimney. It was cold, but honest. That's how I knew I was in the right place. The cottage sits on a small rise above a winding path. It's smaller than the house by the lake, only 3 rooms and a porch that creaks in the wind. The roof leaks when it rains, and the floor tilts slightly near the hearth, but it breathes easily, and that's all I need. The woman from the village who rents it to me comes by once a week. She brings milk, bread, and the kind of conversation that doesn't demand answers. She asked my name the first day, and I told her simply, "Haven." She nodded as if she already knew. I've been here 2 months now. The days are slow in a way that makes them full. I walk the hills in the mornings when the fog still hugs the ground. The soil is dark and damp, and when I press my hand to it, it feels alive like the heartbeat of something too big to name. Sometimes I sit by the stream and write in a new notebook. Not about the past, not about what I left behind, but about what remains. The sound of water, the color of sky before rain, the quiet between birdsong. I think silence has stopped being a place I hide in. Now it's where I live. I still dream of the house sometimes, not as a ghost, but as a friend I visit in memory. I see Clara in the garden, the children running along the fence, laughter spilling across the grass. Evan sits on the porch, eyes softer now, his voice no longer filled with walls. I don't know if it's real or just what I hope for them, but the dream feels true enough to keep. I sent Arthur a letter last week. Just a few lines to say I was well and that the hills had been kind. He wrote back with news of the foundation. People have already begun to visit, writers, painters, travelers with more questions than belongings. He says they sit by the lake, read Daniel's letters, and leave their own behind. I like that. The house is still teaching. There are evenings here when the light falls in a way that reminds me of him, Daniel, standing by the window, hair turned gold by sunset. I sometimes speak to him out loud. The walls don't answer, but the wind always seems to shift when I do. Last night I dreamt of Clara. She was sitting by the lake, the children beside her, the water calm and clear. She looked up, and though she couldn't see me, she smiled as if she could feel I was near. In the dream, I whispered something to her, only one line. Peace isn't the absence of noise, it's the presence of understanding. When I woke, the window was open, and the scent of lavender drifted in. I hadn't planted any here. Somehow, it had found me anyway. This morning, I boiled water for tea and sat on the porch. The first light reached across the valley, touching the hills like a slow blessing. The world was still, and in that stillness I heard the echo of Daniel's laughter, the rhythm of Clara's voice, the giggles of the children I helped raise. The sound folded into the air, becoming part of it. I opened my notebook and wrote, "Home isn't where we live. It's what remembers us kindly after we've gone." I paused, looking at the horizon. The line between earth and sky was thin as breath. Somewhere out there, the lake was shining. The house was breathing. The soil was whispering our names. I closed the notebook and smiled. The story is finished now, not because it ends, but because it knows how to stay quiet. I poured the last of my tea into the earth beside the porch, a small offering. The wind stirred, gentle and familiar, brushing through my hair. And for one perfect moment, I heard them all: Daniel, Clara, the children, the house itself. Their voices folded into a single sound that was neither here nor there. It was simply peace.